Subscribe now and press the bell icon so you never miss an emotional story that touches your heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus Wellington stood at attention. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his posture was as straight as the ceremonial spear he held. For 12 years, Marcus had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace, and he took immense pride in his duty. Every day, tourists would gather to watch the guards, trying to make them smile or break their stern expressions. Marcus never did. He was a professional, dedicated to protecting the royal family and maintaining the centuries-old tradition of the Queen's Guard. Marcus was 42 years old. A man who had given his entire adult life to military service. He had joined the British Army at 18, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and earned several commendations for bravery. When he was selected for the prestigious role of Royal Guard, his mother had cried with pride. His father, a retired soldier himself, had shaken his hand with tears in his eyes. This was the pinnacle of military honor in Britain. And Marcus wore that honor like a badge every single day. But beneath the red tunic and the bearskin cap, Marcus was just a man. He had dreams beyond the palace walls, hopes for a family of his own, and fears that kept him awake at night. His knees ached from standing for hours in the cold London weather. His back had been injured during his service in Afghanistan, and some mornings he could barely get out of bed. The military doctors had told him he could retire on medical grounds, but Marcus refused. This was his life, his purpose, and he could not imagine himself doing anything else. On that particular Tuesday morning in October, the weather was unusually warm for autumn. Crowds of tourists filled the streets around the palace, their cameras clicking constantly. Marcus stood at his post near the main gate, his face emotionless as hundreds of people passed by. Children pointed at him. Adults took selfies with him in the background. And tour guides explained the history of the guards in various languages. Marcus heard it all, but showed no reaction. That was his job. Among the crowd was a young boy named Tommy, 7 years old, visiting London with his parents from Australia. Tommy was fascinated by the guards. He had begged his parents to bring him to see them, and now he stood just a few meters away from Marcus, his eyes wide with wonder. Tommy's father was busy taking photographs while his mother checked the map on her phone, planning their next destination. Tommy, like most children his age, could not stand still. He bounced on his toes, tugged at his father's sleeve, and pointed at Marcus with excitement. The crowd around the palace was unusually large that day. A diplomatic event was scheduled for the afternoon, and security had been increased. Police officers patrolled the perimeter, and barricades had been set up to keep the crowds at a safe distance. But with so many people, chaos was inevitable. Parents struggled to keep track of their children, tour groups moved in tight clusters, and street vendors pushed through, selling souvenirs and bottled water. Marcus noticed a commotion near one of the side streets. A construction crew was working on a building renovation project about 200 meters away. They had set up scaffolding and blocked off part of the sidewalk with orange cones and yellow tape. The workers were on their lunch break, and their equipment sat idle. Marcus watched as a delivery truck backed up slowly toward the construction site, its warning beeper sounding regularly. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary then it happened. The scaffolding, which had not been properly secured, began to shift. A strong gust of wind caught one of the upper platforms, and the entire structure swayed dangerously. Workers shouted warnings, and people nearby began to move away quickly. But the structure was heavy and unstable, and within seconds, it began to collapse. Metal poles crashed to the ground, sending clouds of dust into the air. Wooden planks tumbled down, and tools scattered across the pavement. The crowd panicked. People screamed and ran in all directions. Parents grabbed their children and sprinted away from the falling debris. Police officers rushed toward the scene, shouting for people to clear the area. Marcus, still at his post, watched as the chaos unfolded. His training told him to remain at his position unless ordered otherwise. The palace had its own security protocols, and guards were not supposed to abandon their posts under any circumstances. But then Marcus saw him. Tommy, the little Australian boy who had been watching him so intently just moments before. In the confusion, Tommy had become separated from his parents. He was standing frozen in the middle of the street, directly in the path of the falling scaffolding. His parents were nowhere to be seen, swept away by the panicking crowd. The little boy looked terrified, tears streaming down his face as he called out for his mother. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus could see every detail with painful clarity. The scaffolding was collapsing in Tommy's direction. A large metal beam was falling at an angle that would bring it down exactly where the boy stood. Marcus estimated he had maybe 5 seconds, perhaps less. No one else was close enough to reach Tommy in time? The police officers were still pushing through the crowd. The construction workers were too far away. It was just Marcus and a little boy about to die. Every fiber of Marcus's being screamed at him to move, but his training held him back. He had sworn an oath. He had been given strict orders. Royal Guards did not leave their posts. They did not break formation. They did not abandon their duty. For 12 years, Marcus had followed these rules without question. But now, in this single moment, he had to make a choice. Duty or conscience, orders or humanity, the uniform or the man beneath it. Marcus made his decision. He dropped his ceremonial spear, and it clattered against the stone pavement. His bearskin cap fell from his head as he launched himself forward. His legs pumped with an urgency he had not felt since his combat days in Afghanistan. His boots pounded against the cobblestones as he sprinted toward Tommy with everything he had. The crowd seemed to part before him, though he'd barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the little boy in the falling beam above him. Marcus's lungs burned. His injured back screamed in protest, but he did not slow down. He had been trained for moments like this, trained to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. He reached Tommy just as the beam came crashing down. Marcus grabbed Tommy with both arms and threw himself forward, using his body to shield the child as they tumbled to the ground. The metal beam crashed down exactly where they had been standing just a fraction of a second earlier. The impact sent vibrations through the pavement, and dust exploded into the air. Smaller pieces of scaffolding rained down around them, clanging against the street and sidewalk. Marcus held Tommy tight, curling his body around the boy to protect him from the falling debris. When the noise finally stopped, Marcus slowly lifted his head. His ears were ringing, and his vision was blurry from the dust. He looked down at Tommy, who was crying but appeared unharmed. The boy's eyes were squeezed shut, and his small hands clutched Marcus's red tunic. Marcus carefully shifted his weight and helped Tommy sit up. He quickly checked the child for injuries, running his hands over Tommy's arms, legs, and head. Apart from some scraped knees and dirt on his clothes, the boy was fine. Relief washed over Marcus, but it was immediately followed by searing pain. His left leg felt wrong, very wrong. When he had thrown himself forward to save Tommy, he had twisted awkwardly and something in his knee had given way. Marcus tried to stand, but his leg buckled beneath him. The pain was intense, shooting up from his knee through his entire leg. He fell back to the ground, gritting his teeth to keep from crying out. Police officers and paramedics arrived within moments. They had been nearby because of the diplomatic event, and their quick response was a blessing. One paramedic knelt beside Tommy, speaking softly to calm him while checking his vital signs. Another paramedic turned her attention to Marcus, immediately noticing how he was holding his leg. She asked him questions, but Marcus could barely focus on her words. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was wearing off, and the pain was becoming unbearable. Tommy's parents pushed through the crowd, their faces pale with terror. Tommy's mother was sobbing as she dropped to her knees beside her son, pulling him into her arms. Tommy's father stood frozen for a moment before turning to Marcus, his eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but could not find words. What do you say to someone who has just saved your child's life? How do you express gratitude for something so profound? An ambulance arrived, and the paramedics carefully loaded Marcus onto a stretcher. Tommy's mother insisted on riding in the ambulance with them, still holding her son tightly. As they drove toward the hospital, she kept thanking Marcus over and over. Marcus managed a weak smile and told her it was okay, that he was just glad Tommy was safe. But inside, Marcus was beginning to realize the full extent of what had just happened. He had abandoned his post. He had broken protocol. He had dropped his weapon and removed his uniform hat in full view of hundreds of witnesses. At the hospital, doctors examined Marcus's leg. The news was not good. He had torn his anterior cruciate ligament, commonly known as the ACL, one of the major ligaments in the knee. The injury was severe, made worse by the previous damage to his back and the strain he had put on his body during the rescue. The doctors explained that he would need surgery and months of physical therapy. Even with treatment, they could not guarantee he would regain full mobility. For a royal guard who needed to stand at attention for hours and march in perfect formation, this was potentially a career-ending injury. Marcus lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. His commanding officer had already called to check on him, and the conversation had been brief and formal. The officer had said they would discuss the situation once Marcus was recovered, but Marcus understood what that meant. An investigation would be launched. Questions would be asked. Had Marcus acted appropriately? Had he put the royal family at risk by abandoning his post? Should he have waited for police or other emergency personnel to handle the situation? The media had caught wind of the story almost immediately. Someone in the crowd had filmed the entire incident on their phone, and the video had gone viral within hours. News outlets around the world were showing footage of Marcus dropping his spear and sprinting toward the collapsing scaffolding. The headlines praised him as a hero, but Marcus did not feel like one. He felt like a soldier who had disobeyed orders. That shame weighed heavily on him. Tommy and his parents visited Marcus the next day. Tommy's mother brought flowers and a card that Tommy had drawn himself. It showed a stick figure in a red uniform saving a smaller stick figure from black scribbles that Marcus assumed was supposed to be the scaffolding. Tommy had written, "Thank you for saving me," in wobbly letters across the top. The boy was shy at first, hiding behind his mother's leg. But eventually he approached the bed and gave Marcus a gentle hug. Tommy's father pulled Marcus aside, or as aside as one could get in a hospital room, and spoke quietly. He explained that he and his wife had been paralyzed with fear when they saw the scaffolding collapse. They had been pushed back by the crowd and could not reach their son. They had watched helplessly as the metal beam fell, certain they were about to watch their only child die. Then they had seen Marcus, a flash of red uniform moving faster than seemed possible, reaching Tommy just in time. Tommy's father's voice broke as he said that Marcus had given them back their son. They would never forget that. The hospital staff were kind, but Marcus could see the concern in their eyes. The surgery was scheduled for the following week, and the orthopedic surgeon had been honest with him. The damage was extensive. Marcus's knee had already been weakened by years of military service, and this injury had essentially destroyed what was left. The surgeon could repair it, but Marcus would never be the same. He would walk with a limp, possibly need a cane, and certainly could never return to active duty as a royal guard. Marcus spent his days in the hospital watching the news coverage of his rescue. He was amazed by how many people were calling him a hero. The British Prime Minister had made a statement praising his bravery. The Australian government had sent an official thank you letter. Social media was flooded with supportive messages. People were saying he deserved a medal, that he was the best of British tradition, that he represented everything noble about service and sacrifice. But Marcus also saw the other side of the conversation. Military analysts and royal commentators debated whether he had made the right choice. Some argued that royal guards served a ceremonial but important security function. And abandoning post could set a dangerous precedent. What if it had been a distraction? What if terrorists had used the chaos to attempt an attack on the palace? Others defended Marcus, saying that any rule or protocol that prevented saving a child's life was a rule that deserved to be broken. His fellow guards visited him, though they had to come individually and during off-duty hours. They brought him magazines, snacks, and news from the palace. They told him that people were talking, that the brass was divided on how to handle the situation. Some officers wanted to commend him. Others wanted to reprimand him. Everyone agreed that what he had done was brave. But bravery did not necessarily excuse breaking protocol. Marcus's mother came from her home in Yorkshire, taking the train down to London as soon as she heard. She sat beside his bed and held his hand, just like she had when he was a little boy recovering from childhood illnesses. She told him she was proud of him, that his father would have been proud too. His father had passed away 3 years earlier. Marcus often wondered what advice the old soldier would have given him now. The surgery took place on a gray Thursday morning. Marcus was wheeled into the operating room early, and the last thing he remembered before the anesthesia took hold was the surgeon's reassuring voice telling him the procedure lasted for hours. The surgeon had to reconstruct the torn ligament using a graft, repair damage to the surrounding tissue, and address complications from Marcus's previous injuries. When Marcus woke up in the recovery room, his leg was wrapped in heavy bandages and immobilized in a brace. The pain was manageable thanks to medication, but the reality of his situation hit him like a hammer. Physical therapy began 2 days after surgery. A cheerful therapist named Sarah came to his room and explained the long road ahead. She was honest with him, which Marcus appreciated. The recovery would take at least 6 months, possibly longer. He would need to relearn how to walk properly, rebuild the strength in his leg, and adapt to the permanent limitations his knee would now have. Sarah told him that many people recovered from ACL injuries and went on to live normal, active lives. But she also acknowledged that returning to the physical demands of being a Royal Guard would be virtually impossible. Marcus threw himself into the therapy with the same determination he had brought to his military training. Every day, Sarah would come to his room with exercises designed to slowly restore mobility to his knee. At first, the movements were tiny, barely noticeable. Flexing his foot, tightening his thigh muscles, bending his knee just a few degrees. Each small movement caused pain, but Marcus gritted his teeth and pushed through. He had survived combat in Afghanistan. He could survive this. While Marcus focused on his physical recovery, the investigation into his actions continued. A formal board of inquiry had been convened to examine what had happened that day. Marcus had to give a detailed statement, explaining his thought process and justifying his decision to leave his post. He told them the truth. He had seen a child in danger, calculated that no one else could reach him in time, and made a split-second decision to act. He understood that he had broken protocol, and he accepted full responsibility for his actions. The board interviewed dozens of witnesses, reviewed security footage, and consulted with experts on Royal Guard procedures. They examined whether the palace had been put at risk during the brief moments Marcus had been away from his post. They analyzed the timing of events, the positioning of other guards and security personnel, and the overall threat level that day. The investigation was thorough and painfully slow. Marcus waited for their decision, knowing that his entire future hung in the balance. Tommy and his family had returned to Australia, but they stayed in contact with Marcus through email and video calls. Tommy's mother sent regular updates, sharing photos of Tommy back at school, playing with his friends, living the normal life of a 7-year-old boy. Each message reminded Marcus why he had done what he did. Seeing Tommy smile and laugh made the pain, the uncertainty, and the potential end of his career feel worthwhile. That little boy was alive because of a choice Marcus had made in a fraction of a second, and nothing could take that away. The media attention gradually died down, as it always does. But Marcus's story had touched something deep in the public consciousness. Letters poured into the hospital from people all over the world. Parents thanked him for valuing a child's life above rules and regulations. Veterans wrote to say they understood the impossible position he had been in, torn between duty and morality. Children sent him drawings and get-well cards. A primary school class in Manchester sent him a giant banner signed by every student, declaring him their hero. But not all the feedback was positive. Some people, particularly those with military backgrounds, felt Marcus had failed in his duty. They argued that soldiers must follow orders without question, that discipline and protocol exist for good reasons, that Marcus had set a dangerous example. They worried that other guards might now feel justified in abandoning their posts for personal reasons, undermining the entire structure of military discipline. Marcus read these criticisms too, and they stung because part of him agreed with them. 6 weeks after the incident, Marcus was finally discharged from the hospital. He could walk with crutches, though his leg was still weak and painful. He moved into a temporary flat in London, closer to the physical therapy center, where he would be spending several hours each day for the foreseeable future. His mother wanted him to come home to Yorkshire, but Marcus needed to stay in London for the investigation and for his medical treatment. The flat was small and Spartan, but it was his own space. Marcus spent his evenings doing his therapy exercises, watching television, and avoiding social media. He had learned that reading about himself online was a mistake. For every 10 supportive comments, there was one vicious attack, and those negative words stuck in his mind far more than the praise. He focused instead on his recovery, measuring progress in small victories. Walking to the bathroom without crutches, bending his knee a few more degrees, standing for 5 minutes without pain. Physical therapy sessions with Sarah became the anchor of his daily routine. She pushed him hard, but never beyond what his body could handle. They talked during the sessions, and Marcus found himself opening up to her in ways he rarely did with anyone. He told her about his time in Afghanistan, the friends he had lost, the trauma he carried. He spoke about his father and the legacy of military service in his family. He admitted his fears about the future, about who he would be if he was no longer a Royal Guard. Sarah listened without judgment. She had worked with many veterans and understood the psychological challenges that came with physical injuries. She gently suggested that Marcus might benefit from talking to a therapist, someone who specialized in helping soldiers transition to civilian life. Marcus resisted at first, seeing it as a sign of weakness, but eventually he agreed to try. His first session with Dr. Chen, psychologist who worked specifically with military personnel, was awkward and uncomfortable. But by the third session, Marcus found himself actually looking forward to their conversations. 3 months after the incident, Marcus received word that the Board of Inquiry had reached their conclusion. He was summoned to a meeting at the Ministry of Defense, a gray building where decisions about military careers were made in formal offices by officers in crisp uniforms. Marcus dressed in civilian clothes, unable to wear his uniform because he was still technically on medical leave. He used only one crutch now, a sign of his progress, but he was acutely aware of how different he looked from the soldier he had been. The meeting room was austere, with a long table and uncomfortable chairs. 3 senior officers sat on one side, their faces carefully neutral. Marcus sat on the other side, his crutch leaning against the wall beside him. The lead officer, a general with gray hair and countless medals on his chest, cleared his throat and began to read from a document. Marcus's heart pounded as he listened to the formal language, trying to decipher what the verdict would be. The general explained that the board had carefully considered all the evidence and testimonies. They had reviewed Marcus's 12 years of exemplary service, his military decorations, and his unblemished record. They had also examined the specific circumstances of that October day, the speed at which events unfolded, and the limited time Marcus had to make his decision. The general paused, and in that silence, Marcus felt his entire future hanging by a thread. Then came the verdict. The board found that while Marcus had technically violated protocol by leaving his post, his actions were justified by the extraordinary circumstances. A child's life had been in immediate danger. No other personnel were in position to respond, and Marcus had made a reasonable judgment that saving the child took precedence over his ceremonial duties. However, the board also concluded that due to the severity of his injuries, Marcus was no longer physically capable of performing the duties of a Royal Guard. He would be honorably discharged from active service. Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and devastation. He was not being punished, not being branded as a soldier who had failed in his duty. The word honorably meant everything. But he was also losing the career that had defined him for more than 2 decades. The general continued explaining that Marcus would receive his full pension, access to veteran support services, and assistance in transitioning to civilian life. They were also recommending him for a commendation for bravery, though the final decision on that would come from higher authorities. After the meeting, Marcus stood outside the Ministry of Defense building, leaning on his crutch and watching people hurry past on the London streets. Office workers rushed to meetings, tourists studied their maps, and life continued as it always did. Marcus felt unmoored, like a ship that had suddenly lost its anchor. For his entire adult life, he had known exactly who he was and what his purpose was. Now, at 42 years old with a damaged knee and no career, he had to figure out what came next. He called his mother from a bench in a nearby park. She cried when he told her the news, though Marcus was not entirely sure if they were tears of sadness or relief. She had always worried about him, first during his tours in Afghanistan, then during his years standing guard in all weather, watching him push his body beyond its limits. She told him to come home to Yorkshire, to rest and heal and think about the future. Marcus promised he would visit soon. He was not ready to leave London yet. Tommy's family sent him a video message when they heard about his discharge. Tommy appeared on screen, his gap-toothed smile bright and cheerful. He had made Marcus a drawing of a superhero that looked like a royal guard, complete with the red uniform and tall black hat, flying through the air to save people. Tommy's parents appeared next, their gratitude evident in every word. They told Marcus that he would always be a hero to them, that their son was alive because of him, and that they hoped he would come visit them in Australia someday. The invitation was genuine. Marcus found himself actually considering it. Physical therapy continued, and Marcus's progress was steady, if unspectacular. His knee would never be perfect, but he was learning to live with its limitations. Sarah taught him exercises he could do for the rest of his life to maintain strength and flexibility. She also introduced him to other veterans who were going through similar transitions. Marcus found unexpected comfort in their shared experiences. They met for coffee, shared stories, and supported each other through the difficult process of redefining themselves. Outside of military service, Dr. Chen helped Marcus work through the complicated emotions surrounding his discharge. In their sessions, Marcus admitted that part of him was angry. Angry at the construction company for their negligence with the scaffolding, angry at the military for rules that seemed to value protocol over human life, angry at his own body for breaking down. But beneath the anger was grief. He was grieving the loss of his identity, the community he had been part of, and the sense of purpose that came with wearing the uniform. Dr. Chen encouraged Marcus to think about what skills and values he had developed during his military service that could transfer to civilian life. Marcus was disciplined, responsible, and capable of staying calm under pressure. He had leadership experience, attention to detail, and a deep sense of duty. These qualities did not disappear just because he was no longer wearing a uniform. The question was how to apply them in a new context. A new chapter of his life. 5 months after the incident, Marcus attended a ceremony at the palace. He wore a suit instead of his uniform, and he walked with only a slight limp now, having graduated from crutches to nothing. The ceremony was small and private, attended only by a handful of officials and Marcus's mother. He was presented with the King's Commendation for Bravery, a prestigious award recognizing his actions that October day. The citation read that Marcus had displayed exceptional courage and selfless disregard for his own safety in order to preserve the life of a child. Shaking hands with the official presenting the award, Marcus felt a complex swirl of emotions. Pride, certainly, but also sadness for what he had lost and uncertainty about what lay ahead. His mother beamed with joy, taking countless photos and dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Afterward, they went to lunch at a small restaurant near the palace, the same place where Marcus had often eaten during his breaks when he was still on active duty. The owner recognized him and refused to let them pay for their meal, saying it was an honor to serve a real hero. Marcus started exploring potential careers. The military offered transition programs, connecting veterans with employers and educational opportunities. He considered going back to school, perhaps studying something completely different from anything he had done before. He looked into security consulting, personal protection services, and even teaching positions at military academies. Each possibility felt both exciting and terrifying. One opportunity particularly caught his attention. A charity organization that worked with at-risk youth was looking for mentors. They wanted people with military backgrounds who could provide structure, discipline, and positive role models for teenagers who had gotten into trouble or were in danger of dropping out of school. Marcus attended an information session and found himself connecting with the mission. These kids needed someone to believe in them, to show them that their past mistakes did not define their future. Marcus understood that feeling intimately now. He began volunteering with the organization, meeting with a group of teenage boys twice a week. At first, they were suspicious of this former soldier with his rigid posture and serious demeanor. But gradually, they began to trust him. Marcus shared his own story with them, not just the heroic rescue that had made the news, but also his struggles with injury, identity, and purpose. He told them about the times he had failed, the fears he carried, and the difficult process of rebuilding his life. His honesty resonated with the teenagers in ways that lectures and rules never could. Marcus worked with at-risk youth, including 15-year-old James, a shoplifter on probation who believed society had written him off. During their first conversation, James asked Marcus why he bothered helping kids like him. Marcus shared the story of choosing between following orders and saving Tommy, explaining that sometimes rules don't account for life's complexity, and we must trust our own judgment about what's right. Something in James's expression softened. Over the following weeks, he started showing up on time, completed community service without complaint, and rejoined his school's football team. When Marcus asked what changed, James shrugged and said if a decorated soldier could admit being scared and uncertain, maybe he could try again too. Marcus found purpose in these small victories. Each teenager who turned their life around felt like proof his new path had meaning. It was different from military service, less defined, more complicated, but somehow more rewarding. He wasn't just protecting people anymore. He was helping them build better futures. 8 months after leaving the hospital, Marcus received an unexpected email from a London publishing company. They'd followed his story since the rescue and wanted him to write a book about his experiences, not just that dramatic day, but his entire military journey, veteran challenges, and civilian transition. They believed his story could inspire others struggling after trauma or major life changes. Marcus was skeptical. He wasn't a writer, and sharing private struggles felt uncomfortable. But if his story could help even one veteran feel less alone, or encourage someone to trust their instincts when facing impossible choices, wouldn't that be worthwhile? After several conversations, he signed a contract to spend the next year writing his memoir with professional editorial help. Writing forced Marcus to confront avoided memories and emotions. He relived combat experiences in Afghanistan, described lost friends, and examined his physical and psychological scars. He wrote about the pride and purpose as a Royal Guard, the daily routine that gave structure, and the devastating moment when that career ended. He wrote about Tommy, that impossible choice. In learning to live with chronic pain and permanent limitations, the process was painful but cathartic. Dr. Chen told him writing could be therapy, a way to process trauma and make sense of difficult experiences. As Marcus typed memories and feelings, they became less overwhelming, more manageable. He was creating narrative from chaos, finding meaning in events that once seemed random and cruel. The book became not just a record, but a tool for understanding who he was and who he wanted to become. Tommy's family flew to London for the rescue's 1-year anniversary. When Tommy ran up to hug him at a small cafe, Marcus's eyes watered. The boy had grown so much taller, more confident. Tommy excitedly told Marcus about school, friends, and his new hobby, collecting model soldiers. He pulled out a small figure from his pocket, a Royal Guard in perfect detail, and gave it to Marcus as a gift. They spent the afternoon visiting London's famous sights. At the palace, where a new guard stood at Marcus's former post, Tommy watched with the same fascination as a year earlier, but now with understanding. He knew beneath the uniform was a real person with feelings and fears. Tommy asked if Marcus missed being a guard. Marcus admitted he did, sometimes, but told Tommy about his work with troubled teenagers, the book he was writing, and the new purpose he was discovering. Tommy listened seriously, nodding as if understanding the complexity. That evening, Tommy's father gave a toast about how one moment of courage created ripples extending far beyond that single day. Tommy was alive and thriving. Marcus had discovered a calling helping other young people. The construction company had implemented stricter safety protocols, preventing future accidents. The story sparked conversations about duty and humanity, rules and exceptions, what it truly means to serve. One man's sprint had changed more lives than anyone predicted. That night, Marcus reflected on the past year's journey. He'd lost something irreplaceable when his knee gave out his career. Identity, physical capabilities, all diminished or destroyed. But he'd also gained unexpected things: deeper self-understanding, new relationships, a mission that felt meaningful in ways military service sometimes hadn't. He learned courage wasn't just running toward danger, but facing uncertainty, admitting vulnerability, being willing to start over when everything falls apart. The book was published 10 months later, titled The Split Second: A Guard's Choice Between Duty and Humanity. It received positive reviews and modest sales, but more importantly, connected with readers who saw themselves in Marcus's struggles. He received letters from transitioning veterans, parents who'd faced impossible choices, people dealing with chronic pain and disability, anyone who'd felt lost about their purpose. Marcus responded to as many as possible, offering encouragement and sharing lessons learned. A documentary filmmaker created a short film about Marcus's story, including Tommy and his family. The documentary captured Marcus working with at-risk youth, showed physical therapy sessions, and included emotional interviews with Tommy and his parents. The film premiered at a small London festival, deeply touching audiences who shared their own stories of difficult choices and second chances. Marcus began speaking at schools and veterans organizations. Though not a natural public speaker initially, he found his voice with practice. He talked about trusting instincts, the difference between blind obedience and thoughtful service, and finding purpose after loss. Young soldiers preparing to leave the military found his message particularly relevant. Facing the same uncertainty and fear of losing their identity outside the armed forces structured world, the charity organization offered Marcus a full-time position as program director. The modest salary couldn't compare to private security earnings, but the work fulfilled him in ways money never could. He accepted, officially marking his complete transition from soldier to civilian, protector to mentor, someone who followed orders to someone who helped others find their own path. Marcus moved to a larger, stair-free flat, better suited to his knee. He adopted Captain, a 3-legged shelter dog, with his own survival story. They made an odd pair on daily walks through London parks. The limping man and 3-legged dog butt understood each other perfectly. Both had lost something important, but found ways to keep moving forward. Captain became a therapy dog, accompanying Marcus 2 sessions with teenagers who responded well to the friendly animal. On the rescue's 2nd anniversary, Marcus returned to where the scaffolding collapsed. A small plaque commemorated the incident and his heroic actions. Standing before it, he thought about 9-year-old Tommy thriving in Australia, about James and other teenagers he worked with, about fellow guards still at their palace posts. He didn't regret his choice, but understood every choice has consequences, some immediate, some unfolding slowly over time. Marcus's knee ached as always when weather changed, a permanent reminder of those seconds that changed everything. But he'd learned to accept it, even feel strangely grateful. The injury forced him to grow in unexplored directions, broke him open, and allowed him to be rebuilt into something different, perhaps even better. Not a perfect soldier standing at attention, but a complete human being with scars and wisdom and compassion earned through suffering. 3 years after the rescue, Marcus spoke at a youth detention center. The teenagers sat with crossed arms and suspicious eyes, expecting another lecture from another adult who didn't understand their lives. Marcus showed them a photograph of himself in Royal Guard uniform, then one taken 6 months after his injury, struggling with crutches, his face tight with pain. That got their attention. He told them the real story, the fear, the shame of breaking his oath, the dark hospital nights wondering who he was without his uniform, the anger and grief and slow rebuilding process. One boy asked if saving one kid was worth destroying his career and body. Marcus said regret was complicated, that he sometimes wished things had happened differently. But then he thought about Tommy growing up, the teenagers he'd helped, the veterans who'd written, saying his story gave them hope, and the person he'd become through suffering someone more compassionate than the rigid soldier he'd been. Marcus told them they all faced choices requiring the wisdom to know when breaking rules was necessary and the courage to act despite the cost. After his talk, one girl asked if he was angry at the construction company. Marcus explained anger had consumed him for months, but holding on to rage was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. A scarred boy said he didn't deserve a second chance. Marcus told him everyone deserves the opportunity to grow and change, that perfection was an illusion. And what mattered was whether you stayed down or found strength to stand up again. Marcus's reputation grew. Other organizations invited him to speak and consult, offering higher salaries and more prestige, but he stayed where he was. The teenagers needed consistency, someone who wouldn't disappear when something better came along. This was a promise he intended to keep on his own terms. Tommy's family invited Marcus to Australia. Despite the long flight and his swelling knee, seeing Tommy's excited face at the airport made it worthwhile. During the 2-week visit, Tommy's father asked if Marcus blamed Tommy for the injury and lost career. Marcus was startled, then assured them he felt no resentment whatsoever. Tommy had been an innocent child in danger. Marcus visited a local veteran support group where one older veteran said, Marcus's story inspired him to start volunteering with homeless veterans. Marcus realized his influence was spreading in unexpected ways. Back in London, Marcus's life settled into a new normal. He started dating Claire, a teacher who'd read his book and appreciated his honesty about struggles. Their relationship developed slowly. It's built on genuine understanding rather than romantic heroic image. Marcus attended the annual ceremony where new royal guards were sworn in. Watching them, he felt pride in the tradition, nostalgia for his service, and peace that this chapter was closed. One new guard thanked Marcus for showing him that humanity and duty could coexist even when they seemed to contradict. James graduated from university with a social work degree and planned to work with at-risk youth himself. He told Marcus that seeing someone admit to fear and uncertainty while still moving forward had changed his life. Marcus felt pride that rivaled anything from his military career. On the 5th anniversary, Television Network produced a special program revisiting the story. They interviewed Marcus, Tommy, construction workers who'd witnessed the incident, and teenagers Marcus had mentored. The program explored how one moment could create lasting change. It showed 12-year-old Tommy, now articulate and thoughtful, explaining how knowing someone had risked everything to save him made him want to live a life worth saving. The program ended with Marcus at the palace gates sharing final thoughts. He said, "Courage comes in many forms, running toward danger. Getting up with chronic pain daily, admitting fear and asking for help, trusting your heart when training tells you otherwise." He'd make the same choice again without hesitation. The pain, lost career, and difficult transition were worth knowing Tommy was alive and thriving. But heroism has costs that last for years. Supporting heroes meant helping them deal with everything that comes after. Recognizing the person behind the uniform is complex and human and struggling like everyone else. After the program aired, Marcus received thousands of messages from veterans who felt understood. Parents thanking him for valuing a child's life. Young people inspired to keep fighting their difficulties, and active duty soldiers. Grappling with the tension between orders and conscience, Marcus expanded his work to include training programs for youth workers and teachers, emphasizing genuine relationships over rigid rules. He taught them that sometimes the most powerful thing was sharing your own struggles, letting young people see that adults didn't have everything figured out either. Claire moved in with Marcus, bringing warmth and laughter. They adopted another rescue dog named Daisy. The 4 of them became a family imperfect, healing, and real. Marcus learned that love didn't require perfection. Tommy visited London at 14 for a school trip. Now tall and confident, he told Marcus he wanted to be a paramedic. Marcus could see how that single event had shaped Tommy's entire worldview, but encouraged him to explore many paths. Marcus's mother passed away peacefully at 78. Her death hit hard, but Marcus felt grateful she'd lived to see him find new purpose. Many of the teenagers he worked with attended her funeral, showing him that family could be built as well as born. 7 years after the rescue, Marcus published a second book, a guide for veterans transitioning to civilian life. It included practical advice and honest reflections about the emotional journey, the loss of identity, and discovering who you are outside the military. It became required reading for several transition assistance programs. James got married and asked Marcus to be his best man. Marcus's speech talked about second chances and the courage it takes to change, about falling down and getting back up, about finding people who believe in you when you cannot believe in yourself. Marcus continued working with at-risk youth into his 50s. His knee deteriorated further, requiring a cane regularly, but he refused to slow down. The teenagers didn't care that he walked with a limp, made him more relatable. Proof: everyone carries damage and still finds ways to contribute. Tommy became a paramedic as planned. On his 21st birthday, he wrote Marcus, explaining he'd spent his life knowing someone had chosen to save him at great personal cost. Working as a paramedic, saving lives himself. Tommy had finally found a way to honor Marcus's sacrifice. Passing forward the grace he'd been given, Marcus framed that letter in his office. When work became difficult or pain flared up, he'd read Tommy's words and remember why everything had been worth it. One life saved had created ripples beyond calculation. Tommy was saving lives. James was saving lives. The teenagers Marcus mentored helped others. The construction companies improved safety standards, prevented future accidents. Marcus Wellington had started as a soldier who believed in following orders. He'd become a man who understood that sometimes the most important duty is to your own conscience. That true service means sacrificing comfort and certainty for something greater. His sprint across that London street had cost him dearly, but revealed a capacity for courage he might never have discovered otherwise. He'd learned that being broken open can let the light in, that endings can become beginnings, and that the truest measure of a life is not what you achieve, but who you help along the way.